Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Chag Urim Sameach. Happy Hanukkah. A couple of Hanukkahs ago, Rabbi Alex and I had the immense privilege to be living and studying in Jerusalem. And we took a pottery class just before Hanukkah so we could each make our own Chanukiah. I remember exactly how I made mine. I'd fiddle with a lump of clay for a while, and then I'd say, "Help," and Rabbi Alex would lean over from her workstation and turn my clump into something beautiful. Then I would take it from there for about 30 seconds and go, "Help," and Rabbi Alex would lean over from her workstation, and so on, until the session ended and I was staring at this gorgeous Hanukkah right in front of me. And I looked at her and I said, "Wow." And she said, "Yeah." And I said, "I had no idea I was this talented." There's a law on Hanukkah called Pirsumei Nisa, which means publicizing the miracle. It's not enough, our tradition teaches, to light the Chanukiah in private. We're meant to place the illuminated Chanukiah by a window for all to see and know that God performed miracles for us at this season all those years ago. I want to acknowledge that Pirsumei Nisa may be harder for us to do this year. With anti-Semitism running rampant, it's becoming riskier, if not all the more important, to outwardly display our Judaism to an increasingly hostile world. Our tradition acknowledges this and gives us guidelines for where to place the Chanukiah in times of persecution, because the heartbreaking reality is we have to be safe and we have to be careful. But that doesn't change the fact that as Jews, we're meant to publicize the miracle. We're meant to tell our story and be who we are, who we truly are, not in muted, hushed tones or silence, not under wraps or disguises, but loudly and proudly. It's interesting. There are many attempts to cover up people's true identities throughout the Joseph story and in this week's Parsha. Attempts to silence the voices of our heroes, instead of letting their light shine brightly from the windowsill. But there's also the opposite of that, refusals to be silenced, brazen reveals of who we truly are, and the overcoming of adversity to courageously tell our story, Pirsumei Nisa. First, let's start with Joseph. As a young man, Joseph publicizes a little too loudly the miracle of his dreams to his brothers, arousing their jealous animosity, to the point where they try to silence their brother by throwing him into a pit and selling him to Egypt as a slave. They dip Joseph's coveted coat of many colors, the sign of their father's favoritism, in goat's blood and present it to their father Jacob, who cries out, "Ketonet b'ni, chaya ra'a achalatu, tarof toraf Yosef." My son's tunic, Joseph has been torn by a vicious beast. Clothes here are being used as a shroud, as a device in their brother's plot to obscure Joseph's light instead of publicizing it. But flash forward to Joseph's rise to power in Egypt. Blessed by God, Joseph's light dispels the darkness of the pit and of the prison cell until he finds himself second to Pharaoh. In a couple of weeks, we'll arrive at the moment where Joseph, unrecognizable to his brothers in his royal Egyptian royal dress and imposing stature, finally reveals himself to them. He could have remained under wraps, literally, in royal Egyptian garb, clothes again concealing Joseph's true Hebrew identity. He could have continued to be known by Tzafnat Paneach, the Egyptian name everyone called him, but instead, he lets his true light shine through. He affirms his true identity by proclaiming, "Ani Yosef," I am Joseph. And he publicizes the miracle. Ki limichya shalachani Elohim lifnechem. Now do not be distressed, he tells his brothers, or reproach yourselves because you sold me here. It was to save life that God sent me ahead of you. So we see how Pirsumei Nisa is an integral part of what it means to be Jewish. proudly shining our light in the darkness for all to see and not hiding it, recounting God's miracles that brought us to this day and not keeping our glorious story all to ourselves. But is there a counter obligation to Pirsumei Nisa? Just as we are taught to publicize the miracles and not remain silent, are we equally obligated to publicize the atrocities that happen to us and refuse to be silenced when the world denies that they happened the way that they happened, or when the world tolerates horror that it wouldn't otherwise, but because it happened to Jews? I want to warn everyone that I'm going to touch on disturbing and sensitive content in the name of publicizing our story when the world remains deafeningly silent. But I want to give everyone the opportunity, especially if you yourself have experienced physical or emotional trauma, to take care of yourselves or to take care of your young ones, however you need. There's one more character this week before I get into all that. Tamar, who presents a garment not in service of a lie, but of the truth. Tamar is the daughter-in-law of Judah, one of Joseph's older brothers. Tamar's husband, dies, we read this today, while they are still childless, which traditionally meant that Er's brother Onan should marry Tamar and build up the line of his deceased brother. But he spurns this responsibility and dies as a result, leaving one last brother, Shelah, who is too young. Judah promises Tamar that Shelah will marry her when he comes of age. Tamar waits patiently, but when the time comes, Judah refuses to fulfill his promise. So Tamar disguises herself as a prostitute and gains Judah's unsuspecting attention. He wants to lay with her, but she asks him for signs first, his seal, cord, and staff. Months later, word comes to Judah that his daughter-in-law Tamar is pregnant through harlotry. Let her be burned alive, Judah says, until Tamar presents a familiar seal, cord, and staff and says, "It is by the man to whom these belong that I'm pregnant." When Judah realizes what had happened, he acknowledges his mistake and Tamar's righteousness. Tamar's story this week, and the far more brutal story in last week's parashah about the sexual assault of Dinah, speaks to the silencing of women that happens all too often in the face of abuse. We never hear Dinah's account of what happened to her, and Tamar is almost fatally silenced by Judah. As much as I wanted to only talk about the joy of Hanukkah this week, our obligation to publicize miracles seems to come with an equal obligation to publicize atrocities in a world that is now deafeningly silent because it happened to Jews. But it's our responsibility to shed light on what exactly happened to us on October 7th. This week, numerous reports have come out about the brutal rape and murder of Israeli women by Hamas terrorists on October 7th. Evidence of bloodied garments evoke Joseph's brothers bringing the blood-stained tunic to Jacob, their father. And Jacob, seeing it, says, "My son's tunic, my son has been torn by a vicious beast." And we can only imagine the parents of these Israeli women, this time it being real, looking at a blood-stained garment and saying, my daughter has been torn by a vicious beast." And you would think that the world would stand with us in this moment, but it's not. And so it's on us to shed light on what happened, to publicize not only the miracles in our history and in our story, but the atrocities, to give voice to the voiceless, to amplify the voices of women so that they are never silenced, to tell their story. And as a B'nai Yeshurun community, we want to be here for survivors of sexual assault. We want to be here to support you. We want to partner with organizations to support you, and we want you to know that you're not alone. This Hanukkah, we publicize the miracles and we publicize the atrocities. And despite everything, We light our Hanukkah in the windowsill. In a dark and cold world, we shed light, the light of warmth and the light of hope. Shabbat Shalom. Chag Urim Sameach.